When you look at India's geography, there's this incredible paradox. On one hand, it's a landscape that has nurtured civilizations for thousands of years. But on the other, it holds this raw, untamed power that can be, well, incredibly destructive. So today, we're going to dive into this geography of risk and really try to understand why this land is both a giver of life and a source of some serious danger.
I mean, just look at it. From the majestic Himalayas all the way down to its endless coastlines, the very same forces that sculpted this stunning landscape are also what make it one of the most hazard-prone places on Earth. We're going to unpack how this breathtaking beauty and this immense danger are really just two sides of the same coin.
So let's get right into it. What is it about the Indian subcontinent that makes it so uniquely vulnerable to nature's fury? Well, to really get that, we need to clear up a super important distinction first.
Okay, so here's the key thing to get. An earthquake happening in the middle of an empty desert, that's a natural hazard. It's just the Earth doing its thing. But you take that exact same earthquake and put it under a crowded city, now you've got a disaster. The big difference is the human element. It's not just about the event itself, but about who and what is standing in its way.
So we can pretty much split these threats into two big buckets. First, you've got the geological ones, the hazards that come from the ground right beneath our feet. And second, there are the meteorological ones, the ones that come at us from the sky and the oceans. Let's start with what's happening deep inside the Earth.
Right. This is where we get into the truly colossal forces that are constantly, and I mean constantly, reshaping the subcontinent, often with just devastating results.
Okay, try to picture this. The entire landmass of India is literally shoving its way north into the rest of Asia. It's a slow-motion collision for sure, only about a centimeter a year, but that's what pushed up the Himalayas. And all that pushing builds up an unbelievable amount of stress in the Earth's crust. Eventually, that stress has to go somewhere, and when it releases, that's an earthquake.
Now, this map is so important because it shows you exactly where that risk is. These colors aren't just for show. They visualize where that tectonic stress is at its absolute worst. And as you can see, a massive part of the country, especially up in the north, is living under a pretty significant seismic threat.
And if we zoom in on Zone 5, that's the highest risk category, you can see it covers the entire Northeast, big chunks of the Himalayas, and even the run of Kutch out in Gujarat. And get this, it's not just remote areas. Major cities like New Delhi fall into a high-damage risk zone, just one step below the most severe.
And look, this isn't just a what-if scenario. The history speaks for itself. From that monster 8.5 magnitude quake back in 1950 to the absolutely devastating Bhuj earthquake in 2001, these events are a recurring, powerful part of India's reality.
And when these quakes happen under the ocean floor, they can unleash another terrifying hazard: tsunamis. This quote right here is such a stark reminder of the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. It was so powerful that it literally erased the southernmost tip of India from the map. So you see, the danger doesn't just come from below, it also comes from the skies above.
Okay, so we've talked about the ground shaking. Now let's shift our focus from the geological to the meteorological, to those massive weather systems that are born over the warm waters of the Indian Ocean.
So what exactly is a tropical cyclone? Well, the simplest way to think about it is like a gigantic spinning engine made of wind and rain. It's fueled by the heat of the ocean, and honestly, it's one of the most destructive forces of nature on the entire planet. And here's a pretty cool piece of trivia for you. A hurricane in the Atlantic, a typhoon in the Pacific, and a cyclone in the Indian Ocean, they are all the exact same kind of storm. The only thing that changes is what people call it, depending on where in the world it pops up.
So why is the Indian Ocean such a perfect breeding ground for these things? Well, you need a specific recipe, right? You need 3 key ingredients: really warm ocean water to act as fuel, a constant feed of moist air, and something called the Coriolis force, which is basically the spin of the Earth to get the whole thing rotating.
And the power these storms unleash is just staggering. An average severe cyclone can have winds gusting at 180 kilometers per hour. That's more than enough to cause widespread, catastrophic damage along India's incredibly long and densely populated coastline. Now, beyond cyclones, the sheer amount of rain from the monsoons makes floods the single most common disaster in India. And while they cause heartbreaking loss of life and property, there's this weird dual nature to them. They also drop tons of nutrient-rich silt, which, funny enough, is why river floodplains have always been the best places for farming.
All right, let's switch gears to a hazard that doesn't have the drama of an earthquake or a cyclone, but is every bit as devastating. We're talking about drought, a slow, creeping disaster that can end up affecting millions and millions of people.
When a drought really takes hold, the first response is all about pure survival. It becomes this massive logistical puzzle of getting the absolute essentials, clean water, medicine, food for cattle, out to huge areas. And in the worst cases, it means having to move people and their animals completely out of harm's way.
But the real battle isn't just putting out fires. It's about building long-term resilience. And this involves some seriously ambitious, nation-building kind of projects. We're talking about mapping out hidden underground water sources, building huge networks of reservoirs and dams, and even exploring massive engineering feats like linking rivers to move water from areas that have it to areas that don't.
So, when you're facing this incredible variety of natural hazards, what do? How does an entire nation even begin to respond? This last section is all about a huge shift in thinking, from just dealing with disasters after they happen to actively trying to manage the risk beforehand.
And this timeline really tells the story of that mindset shift. For a long time, the approach was basically reactive. You wait for the disaster to hit, then you go in and clean up the mess. But things started to change. First with the global Yokohama strategy in '94, and then with India's own Disaster Management Act in 2005, the whole focus flipped to being proactive, to preparing for, lessening, and reducing the impact of hazards before they ever strike.
The Yokohama strategy was a real game changer. It basically set the blueprint for the whole world. And what was so revolutionary about it? Well, it said, hey, the most vulnerable countries need the most attention. And it understood that the best defense wasn't just aid from other countries, but building up strength from within, with better laws, better local response teams, and working together internationally to share knowledge.
And that, right there, is the most important takeaway. Modern disaster management is all about building better, planning smarter, and making sure communities are educated. It's about lowering that vulnerability so that when a natural hazard inevitably happens, it doesn't have to turn into a full-blown, large-scale disaster.
And all of this brings us to the really critical question for our future. We know that climate change is making a lot of these hazards worse. It's supercharging cyclones and making weather patterns totally unpredictable. The challenge for all of us now is to make sure our strategies for building resilience can evolve and adapt just as fast as our planet is changing.